Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I offer an update on the case of Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoy this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at a brief background of this case, including the updated timeline of the alleged crime, then move to my analysis. Ruby Franke is a social media influencer who lived in Springville, Utah, with her husband and 6 children. Some media sources pronounce her last name Franke. I will just call her Ruby. Ruby operated a successful channel on YouTube. The channel was a family vlog titled 8 Passengers. Ruby shut the channel down about 2.5 years after running into some criticism over the way she treated her children. Not long before this, she became involved with a licensed mental health counselor named Jodi Hildebrandt. Jodi had earned a master's degree in educational psychology in 2003. She had a counseling license that was issued to her in 2005. Jodi ran a company called Connections, which was supposed to offer some type of mental health advice based on honesty, humility, and personal responsibility. Ruby and Jodi ran a YouTube channel together with the same name, Connections. They offered advice on parenting, teaching children, and coping with darkness and deception. On August 30, 2023, Ruby and Jodi were arrested after Ruby's 12-year-old son climbed out of a window at Jodi's residence in Ivins, Utah. The boy ran to a neighbor's house and asked for food and water. The neighbor contacted the police after seeing that the 12-year-old had duct tape on his wrists and ankles and was malnourished. After the police arrived, they found Ruby's 10-year-old daughter in Jodi's residence. She was also suffering from malnutrition. Ruby's children were taken to a hospital and treated. These 2 children and 2 of Ruby's other children were placed into the custody of the Division of Children and Family Services. Ultimately, Ruby and Jodi were charged with 6 counts of second-degree felony aggravated child abuse. Each count carries up to 15 years in prison. Jodi's attorney claimed that Jodi suffered a medical emergency after being arrested, but the nature of the emergency was not disclosed. Ruby made a few dramatic assertions at a hearing about the custody of her children. She claimed that one of her children committed terrible offenses against a younger sibling for years. The younger sibling also became a perpetrator. It's not really clear why Ruby made these claims. Perhaps she was trying to justify her own bad behavior. At the time making this video, both Jodi and Ruby are being held without bail. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. In 2022, the authorities were called to Ruby's residence 2 times regarding the welfare of her children. In April 2022, the police received a report of 2 children running around unsupervised. An officer who responded didn't see anybody. In September of 2022, a welfare check was requested by Ruby's oldest daughter. The police who responded to Ruby's residence said the children would not answer the door, but they could see them through the windows on the phone with someone. A neighbor said that Ruby's vehicle was gone for 4 days before the welfare check. Another neighbor said that Ruby's vehicle was at Jodi's residence. Based on this report, it sounds like Ruby was obsessed with spending time with Jodi and disregarding other responsibilities, almost like her children represented an inconvenience or were an afterthought. Item number 2, Ruby's sister-in-law, Jennifer, spoke to the media. Here's what she had to say about Ruby. Jennifer never liked Ruby because Ruby always thought she was better than other people. Ruby was a very strict parent and was pious. She really started to change when she became involved with Jodi Hildebrandt. Jennifer thought that it was possible that Ruby and Jodi had more than a professional relationship. Jennifer implied that Jodi's company Connections was a cult. Ruby and Kevin went to see Jodi for marriage counseling. Kevin attended a men's group at Connections and was forced to maintain a checklist of what he needed to do better. Again, this was all according to Jennifer. Jodi moved into the residence of Ruby and Kevin. She made Ruby live on one side of the house and Kevin live on the other. The couple could not communicate without Jodi present. In July 2022, Kevin moved out. Jennifer felt as though he had been brainwashed. Based on this report, I wonder if the first contact that Ruby had with Jodi was the marriage counseling, like Jodi pulled Ruby into her cult-like company. Jodi showed Ruby a better way to cope with perceived problems. It's possible that Ruby was in a bad place as far as her parenting skills, and Jodi only amplified that through her nonsensical teachings. Item number 3, the media interviewed Jodi Hildebrandt's niece, Jessie. Jessie had quite a bit to say about Jodi and delivered her narrative in an articulate fashion. Jessie appeared to have strong feelings about Jodi and was trying to process them in light of the events that unfolded. Here's what Jessie said during the interview. When Jessie was a teenager, she used to be under the care of Jodi. According to Jessie, Jodi committed various offenses against her, like tying her up, duct taping her, isolating her, and forcing her to sleep in the snow. Jessie was told that it was dangerous to be around other people, and she was not allowed to speak to others. Jodi would recruit agents who would report back to her if Jessie broke any of the rules. Jodi accused Jessie of being addicted to adult-only images and sex. She would not give Jessie any privacy. Jodi was trying to make life so miserable for Jessie that the sin would be forced out. Jessie implied that Jodi was manipulative and vindictive. Jodi weaponized mental health symptoms of her clients, like Jodi would use everything that a client said against them. Jodi strongly emphasized the role of shame as the root of all psychopathology, which is ironic considering that Jodi allegedly caused shame in others. That would make Jodi the root of all psychopathology. When Jessie tried to warn others about Jodi's behavior, no one listened because Jodi had a lot of support from the LDS Church. In this current situation with the charges against Ruby and Jodi, Jessie was worried that not enough attention would be paid to Jodi, like Ruby would be stealing the spotlight. Jessie suggested that Jodi had been misbehaving for much longer than Ruby and is really the mastermind behind most of Ruby's tactics. Running under the assumption that Jessie has delivered an accurate account of Jodi's behavior, there are a few things that can be learned from this interview. Jodi has had boundary problems for a long time. The type of alleged behavior that she was arrested for has been going on for years. There was a pattern. This wasn't a new behavior. Jodi wants people that she treats to be afraid of the world and ashamed of themselves. There's a particular emphasis on feelings of shame about sexual feelings or behaviors. Item number 4. As I mentioned in my first video about this case, Jodi Hildebrandt ran into some difficulty with her counseling license several years ago and was placed on probation. After she completed her probation, no disciplinary history was recorded on her license. Documents from the Utah Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing contain information about Jodi's journey through the disciplinary process. Here's what happened, according to those documents. In April 2008, Jodi started delivering mental health therapy to a married couple. The board referred to the couple simply as John and Jane Doe. Several times between when the therapy started and March of 2010, Jodi revealed sensitive information about the couple to 2 other mental health therapists and a member of the clergy. The clients had not signed a release. In March 2009, Jodi released sensitive information about John Doe to an administrator at a university located in Utah. In late 2009 and early 2010, Jodi allowed Jane Doe, who was a mental health therapy student, to perform a practicum at her clinic. This establishes what's called a dual relationship, which is typically frowned upon in the world of mental health counseling. Jodi admitted that her conduct was unprofessional. In January of 2012, she was placed on probation for 18 months. She had to meet a number of requirements. For example, she had to meet with the board every quarter, see a board-approved supervisor every 2 weeks, take 4 hours of continuing education focused on dual relationships, ethics, confidentiality, and record-keeping, and she had to write a 500-word essay addressing how the American Counseling Association Code of Ethics applied to her violations. Jodi successfully completed her probation and was released from it in August of 2013. It appeared as though the disciplinary action dropped from her license at some point. In many jurisdictions, a violation history is permanent, but that doesn't appear to be the case in Utah. There are a few things that stood out to me when looking at the minutes from the board meetings. One, the disciplinary action taken against Jodi appeared to be appropriate. The board members fully appreciated how serious the violations were. It's easy to view this situation now and say that the board did not recognize Jodi's true character, but board members can only evaluate the information they have at the time. Two, during one meeting, Jodi referenced alleged stalking behavior. She claimed that the inability to protect herself and her family from stalking was the biggest stress in her life. In another meeting, she indicated that she continued to deal with a stalker. It's almost like Jodi was trying to make the board meetings about her problems and create another bad guy for people to worry about. Like they shouldn't pay attention to her, they should worry about this mysterious stalker. Mentioning this was a potential red flag. It appeared as though Jodi was trying to play the victim. I think this is something that should have been mentioned to Jodi's supervisor. Moving to my final item, number 5, how would I conceptualize this case based on the information available so far? This is just a theory, my opinion. Many years ago, Jodi Hildebrandt developed a treatment modality which was inspired by her strict religious belief system. She was taught that people should be ashamed and fearful of sexual desires and behavior. Sex was inherently evil, and people should avoid even thinking about it. Sexual desire leads to shame, and shame leads to mental health problems. Jodi believed it was her mission to dominate and control other people in order to expose their shame. This was consistent with her sadism and vindictiveness. The theory she developed allowed her to explore her dark side under the guise of doing something good. Jodi used her spiritual beliefs as a mechanism to induce shame and encourage people to confess their sins, to admit that they thought about sex at some point during their life. Jodi collected all these shameful confessions and used them to further manipulate her clients. In Jodi's mind, this so-called therapy would somehow fix people's problems. But of course, Jodi's theory was not rational. It didn't work as she planned. Rather, it only led to her allegedly mistreating various people. Jodi refused to learn from her own mistakes and maladaptive behavior. She just kept pushing her distorted view of psychotherapy on other people. She was insistent that she was right, despite all the evidence indicating that she was not. After causing harm to 2 of her clients, the ones referred to as John and Jane Doe, Jodi's boundary-violating behavior was exposed. She played the victim and was able to convince the licensing board that she had learned her lesson. Jodi was very persuasive. She was a master manipulator. She was able to get released from probation and return to her maladaptive behavior. She was more careful not to get caught, but her nature did not change. Jodi still had a desire to violate boundaries. Somehow, Ruby stumbled into Jodi's crosshairs, perhaps through seeking marriage counseling. Ruby was already vulnerable to nonsensical beliefs, so Jodi easily manipulated her. Jodi teamed up with Ruby to bring their destructive and inscrutable message to a wider audience. Ruby, after all, was a major social media influencer, capable of propelling Jodi to new heights, or new lows, as the case may be. Jodi applied her dangerous philosophy to help manage Ruby's children. Both Jodi and Ruby believed in their own nonsense to some degree. They allowed their paranoia to dominate their thinking. Everything became about satisfying their irrational fears. Jodi and Ruby thought that they were protecting the children from unclean desires and a hostile world, keeping them safe from evil monsters like peace, knowledge, independence, freedom, and curiosity. The world was full of these dangerous perpetrators. In reality, the entire time along, Jodi and Ruby were the pernicious offenders. They represented the danger from which the children had to escape. Jodi and Ruby thought that their unusual philosophy would be their claim to fame. As it turns out, it was their claim to shame. Those are my thoughts on the case of Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.